It's not to be like the world, and not to be like the great majority of American Christians, but to be like Jesus Christ. I don't know why you're clapping. I'm talking about you.
What's wrong with you people? I'm serious.
You can't say amen, you ought to say ouch.
Hello, Humblebees. Welcome to Tulips and Honey.
Hi, Humblebees. Welcome back to Tulips and Honey. I am your host, Lauren, and today I have a very difficult topic that we're going to be discussing, which is sort of not anything new because we've been addressing some really difficult topics, but this is another one of those. However, I think it's a very important topic, and I think maybe by the end of it, we can all be sort of encouraged together by the things that we're going to be discussing today. So before we get into it, I just wanted to once again thank you all for listening, for joining me today. I am coming to you from my new place, the new assignment that my family and I journeyed to here recently. We traveled the 13-hour drive across the country to a new assignment, which has been a while since we've been able to do because of the pandemic. We weren't actually able to travel to go to new places. So we are now in our new place, and I'm thankful for that. I have my green screen up, so it's working properly. Whereas if you guys were with me live on the last live event, it was not working properly, and I didn't have it up in a way where I could use it the way that it's being used now. And so I had it up where you could see the green screen stuff behind my hands. It was so bad. It's so bad looking. And I forget sometimes how technology can work for us, and sometimes it can work a little bit against us, because if it's not the perfect way that the green screen wants it to be, it will not register things. Like my microphone just kept disappearing, and it would just look like there was a hole in my shoulder. And the great thing, of course, about going live is that there is no editing. So I did not get the chance to edit any of that out. It just was a weird day for going live. But it's looking better now, at least, thank goodness. I am still just in a weird spot in the house. We're trying to figure out the right spot acoustically for doing a podcast, which is something that I haven't actually had to do in over a year, because when we first started this podcast, I was just sitting in the living room or on my husband's recliner in the bedroom and just recording it from wherever was comfortable, because we weren't recording video at the time. It was just audio. And so I wasn't really all that concerned about the acoustics and the lighting and things like that come into play. But this particular house is a little bit more unique, whereas most of the floors are hardwood floors or tile. And so the reason that's important is that if you're recording anything whatsoever, you want to have the most soft, fluffy things as possible surrounding you. And so you don't want to have blank walls, bare walls. They bounce the echoing back and forth. You don't want to have bare floors, shiny furniture, things like that. You want to make sure that wherever you're recording at, that there are not things for your vocals to bounce off and go back and forth on, or else your audio is going to sound kind of wonky. And so the first place I went to look to see if I could find a good spot to record this, I mean, the echo is insane. It literally sounds like what you would expect a cavern. You're like, echo, 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 echo. So that's the biggest area of our house right now that's not being occupied by anything. And so that would have been ideal. That's actually in the basement here. And that would have been great. But unfortunately, the acoustics down there are not good for podcasting at all. Great for my husband singing, because he's got a beautiful voice. Not that anybody will ever notice, because he's afraid to sing in front of people, but he does have this gorgeous voice that I love getting to listen to. In fact, one of the gifts that I always ask for Christmas and my birthday is for him to sing a particular song that I pick, and I'll send him the song that I want him to sing, and then he'll record it for me, and I'm not allowed to show it to anybody else. Another really fun little fact here that you guys can just know, and just be between us, is that my husband talks and walks in his sleep like a bunch. Kaylee does too. Kaylee does nonstop talking in her sleep and walking in her sleep. But the difference is that Kaylee sleeps at night like I do, whereas my husband is a night shift worker at the hospital. So he sleeps during the day, where I have full access to record all of the really, really, really goofy things that he does and he says. So I frequently use that as a joke to say, if you think that I shouldn't have this, I don't know, brand new fluffy puppy, it would be a shame if all of those videos of you talking in your sleep accidentally found themselves online. But it never works because I still don't get fluffy puppies or squirrels, which is usually really what I actually want, is like a wild animal that I shouldn't have. And my husband is very wise, and he usually says no. 99.99999%, he says no. The only times that he's ever said yes is for Forkle and Clementine. So my husband is very wise, and he knows that I kill plants. And how am I supposed to keep a puppy alive if I can't keep a plant alive? These are fake plants. If you're listening and not watching, then you don't know what I'm talking about. But these plants behind me, they're not real. Those are a picture that I found on Canva because I kill real plants. This is just a pretend screen that doesn't really have anything. But I don't know if I've ever like pointed this out often enough. If I have pointed out, I should point it out more often. But this beautiful picture of a tulip here was actually sent to me by Roseland Art Co. So I'm going to make sure to link to her in the descriptions to her Instagram and the descriptions below in case you guys didn't already know. I actually won a beautiful, beautiful picture. I wish I had it here so that I could show you guys this beautiful picture of her watercoloring paintings. And this, along with another tulip, was sent to me. And so I screenshotted it and made sure that I added it to the background of my pictures. And I'm not sure if I've pointed that out enough, but since Christmas is right around the corner, and you guys might be wondering what you should get for your gal this year, if you have a reformed gal, she's going to want tulips, okay? If she's a real reformed gal like me, she wants tulips. But if she's also like me and she kills everything, then she doesn't want live tulips, and you can't get them during the winter anyways. She wants beautiful paintings of them. And so since my name is Tulips and Honey, she was so sweet to send me a couple of watercolor tulips. And so that is where that came from. And I'll make sure to link to that below. But if you're listening and not watching, then you can't see that there is this beautiful watercolored painting on the back of my green screen. That was just sort of I added that myself. So anyways, that was a squirrel, and that's probably one of many, many squirrels. But this topic that we are going to be talking about today is actually revolving around social media and censorship. So we're exiting this election season with a bang, I guess. I don't know, not really a bang. We're sort of whimpering out of it. I don't really know what you would say. Here in America, our election system is usually a little bit more smooth than this. Now, granted, you had Florida, right? And that happened, goodness, I was not old enough to pay attention. I know about it now simply because of learning about these things from the past. But there have been times in our history where we have had to struggle through an election. But this election is the first time, as far as I can recall, that it has been this much of a struggle to just decide who's name the president. And so there's a lot of people that are calling it for one person or the other, and it's very frustrating because you have riots and stuff happening in the streets. And so it's a difficult time right now. But one of the things that is being pointed to and talked about a lot across different platforms is the idea of how the media has affected our election. And it reminded me of something that David Knight actually mentioned to me. And I talked with him briefly about this the other day. And he told me that he was not getting the same amount of organic views on his social media site as he would previously get. And it reminded me of a lot of things that over the past couple of years I had seen. And just as a background to this, whenever I first was saved, I had this horrible Facebook page, which I was locked out of eventually. And I don't know why or how. And I sent them my license, and that didn't work. But when I first got saved, I spent a few months on social media, I think it was about 6 months before I just had to log out of all of it. And so I backed off of everything. I backed off of Twitter, I backed off of Facebook, and pretty much the only thing that I was on social media wise would have been Pinterest. I stayed on Pinterest because Pinterest you would think is pretty safe. So it's not, by the way, in case you have children, you do not want to just let your children scroll through Pinterest. They will land on things that are incredibly inappropriate. But that aside, I took some steps away from all these social media sites. And I remember at the time being very discouraged and really concerned about the way that social media was treating the two different groups that we have here in America. And that's sort of a broad brush aspect of what's happening. So we're going to actually zoom in a little bit on the biblical worldview of this and the biblical perspective and what's happening to Christians on social media. But that is actually where the idea of this episode came from. Was I was seeing a lot of people on both sides of the election saying that certain social media sites were pushing for one or the other. And it reminded me of this, that I had previously been concerned about this a while ago. And I just really had not looked into it since then. So we'll have to define some terms real quickly. In the land of politics, there are liberal politicians. There are liberal Democrats and there are conservative Republicans. In the Christian world, those two words mean something different. And so for liberal Christians, that would mean actually that you look at the scriptures as more of just like a good story. It's not literal. It's not, something that you're actually going to have to be held by. A liberal Christian looks very loosely on the scriptures as good moral stories. Whereas a conservative Christian would once upon a time, there was a movement around all of these kind of things that called the fundamentalists, where they believed in the fundamentals of Christianity. Now that movement splintered, and there are now fundamental churches that I would deeply disagree with. And so that's sort of like the movement where women have to wear skirts, things like that. So that is sort of a little bit of a background to these words that I'm going to be using. I'm not using them in the political terms. I am using them in the Christian terms here. So the conservative Christians on social media, are they being censored, banned, shadow banned, blocked? And is this a systemic issue? In other words, is the gosh, that's a loaded term. I didn't even think about how loaded that term is. I just used the word systemic. You can't use that anymore. Is this a issue where the platforms that we use are doing this knowingly and in a consensus together, finding ways to stop the promotion of Christian values, Christian truth, Christian posts, Christian entertainers, Christian creators, content creators? Is this something that is happening on purpose? Is this something that is a side effect of algorithms? How is this happening? Is this really happening? Why is it happening? Where is it happening? Those are the kind of things that I really, really want to address today. And how do we respond if this is the case? What do we as believers do if we are being faced with something like censorship on social media? So now, the first thing that we have to decide when we're dealing with this is whether or not a private entity such as Google or Facebook or Twitter have the right to actually block or ban or censor any groups that they feel like they want to censor. Do they have that legal right? And this is a difficult thing to answer, because these businesses, they are actually active globally, right? So it's not about whether or not it's legal here in America, because I mean, for us here in America, it is. But David Knight, the brother in Christ that I was originally discussing this with, he's not in America, so our laws won't matter, right, over there. And then you have this situation where some of these aren't even available in places like North Korea or China. You can't use Facebook there. You can't use these things over in those countries. So to distinguish whether or not we feel like these companies have the legal right to do this, we really have to ask ourselves what it is that these platforms are for, what are they saying that they are doing, and whether or not these are open platforms that are subject to the rights of freedom of speech, or whether or not this is a business. Because we were all, as believers, very disturbed by the fact that cake bakeries were being asked to bake cakes that they were uncomfortable baking. So these are questions that we need to deal with, right? And we need to deal with them logically. We want to have a reasonable, logical worldview that is consistent across the board. So the first thing that we need to identify is whether or not these platforms are considering themselves as free speech bastions. And at the surface, at the very base, now this is not true for Google, but Google does own YouTube. So for YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, who owns Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, Reddit, at the surface, these platforms are all supposed to be free speech platforms where you have the ability to come in and give your opinion and be heard by people who want to hear you. And so from their own perspective, what they are saying is that that's what they are. Now, the equivalent here, which we will discuss in a little bit more detail later on, is whether or not a phone company has the right to stop you from having a conversation with somebody else that they disagree with. So if you are on the phone and you are talking to somebody else and you are talking about abortion or same-sex marriage, and you're a believer and they're a believer, and you're talking about the fact that you disagree with these things, does the phone company have the right to discriminate against you because of your religious beliefs and shut off your conversation? Is this no longer freedom of speech, but does it now actually start to trickle into discrimination against believers based on their religious beliefs? That's something that we have to be considering, because if it's just freedom of speech and you have these private businesses, they have their own agendas, they have their own opinions. Do they have the right to say, hey, we don't want you to be able to talk about whatever you want to be able to talk about here? That is something that we have to look at in light of discrimination. Are Muslims allowed to talk about whether or not they agree with abortion or same-sex marriage? Is that something that is being allowed, but the Christians are not being allowed to have the exact same conversation simply because they're Christians? So those are things that are very difficult to prove whenever it comes to social media, because like I mentioned, this is global, it's all over the world. And whereas there are major blocks that happen, there are ways that they can do this where you don't actually see any of this happening from that standpoint. It's not clear and obvious why it's happening. And that's actually the response. I actually did reach out to a lot of different content creators, some larger, some smaller. Now, what I found across the board was that all the content creators that I talked to about this had either been directly affected by this or have known people who were also affected by this. So many of them, not all of them, but many of them actually said something very similar to me. And that revolves around the fact that there is no evidence for it. They could see the clear and obvious difference in their numbers. They could see that something was happening, or perhaps like I had been and David Knight of Exposit the Word had been, they had had ads turned down. This is something that's very, very common over on Facebook that I hear and I see happening in my research on this, that I saw a lot of other content creators suggesting the same thing, that their ads were turned down, they were refused without being told why. And this has happened to me several times, and actually for almost every single episode that I've done about abortion, that does tend to get shut down. But then there was a couple of them that actually were not about that whatsoever, but because of this current political season that we're in, I think that's my guess, but I wasn't told. I mean, they were not political in nature, as in talking about today's politics, but just about like the theocracy episode that I did with Patrick from Cave to the Cross Apologetics. That one was refused a couple of times, and I can't remember now if I was able to get it through or not. But there are a lot of shadow bannings that happen where you can't actually point to this. And so most of the content creators that I discussed this with recently just suggested that they can't actually prove it. Now, the people who can actually prove it have lawyers, and they can go into lawsuits over these things, and that is happening on a bigger scale for people who are a lot bigger than anything about like this little podcast here. And we see that with like Dennis Prager. Obviously he's a Jewish, so he's not falling under the Christian worldview thing that we're discussing today, but his videos were shut down. And we see that happening actually on Amazon, where books are being taken down. They're not being able to be sold any longer because of their content. We're seeing this on a major scale over on YouTube, and that is happening with like the live action folks over there fighting against abortion. That is all things that are being litigated. And so this is happening on a bigger scale, but really something to consider. And I loved Tami Dyke's recent article over on our blog, where she discusses whether or not you have false teachers in your hometown. I'll make sure to link to that below as well if you didn't get a chance to read that. It's a fantastic read. But it reminds me that while we have these big things happening, a lot of times we're not watching the smaller things that happen. And this is something that I was concerned about whenever John MacArthur opened his church, despite the fact that the California laws were stating otherwise, that there were going to be a lot of small churches that wanted to do the same thing that were going to be fined $1,000 a day too, and they were not going to be able to hold up on that, and they're not going to be able to sue back because they don't have the finances for that. And so there is this aspect of our world, and social media plays a huge part in this, where we see the big things and we miss the smaller things. And so hopefully we can kind of address some of the smaller things here that are happening. But just to answer the very first question, are Christians being censored across social media? And the answer is unfortunately yes. Across social media, it is happening in a massive scale. So when I first approached this, I knew that it was going to be happening that there was going to be some larger accounts that were going to be seeing this type of thing. What I did not expect is to find in my research the mass majority of people who have actually experienced some sort of censorship on social media in one form or another. I was very surprised to see the amount of Christians that have been affected by this. Now, that's not to say that every single Christian has had this happen, but what I expected to find was a small group of people that had been targeted because they were very large. But unfortunately, what I found was a large group of people with small accounts that had been targeted simply because they were saying things that would align with biblical truth. So that's not to say that a larger places are not also being banned. Larger groups. Doreen Virtue got back with me that she has had posts taken down and things of that nature. Of course, David Knight from Exposit the Word has a huge platform over on YouTube, 47,000 followers, and he is not just being shadow banned, but having his ads rejected. And so we're going to get into a little bit of each type of social media and the way that they work, get into a little bit of the nitty gritty. I know you guys know already, if you've been watching me long enough, that you know that I love to see the behind the scenes of things. I like to know how things work. I like to see things being taken apart so I can understand how they're put together. That's sort of like the way my brain works. And so it helps me to understand why things happen the way that they happen. So just for instance, understanding that YouTube is owned by Google helped me understand why YouTube would have this amount of blocking and demonetizations and things to that nature happening, because Google is all on the surface. I mean, just flat out there, you can see that Google is not going to stand with Christian values. And so that helped me understand just from the background that, okay, this is how this is working. So we're going to go through each and every platform briefly. Don't worry, guys. This is not going to be an 8-hour episode. This is just going to be brief. We're going to talk about each one and just sort of the effects that it has. And then at the end, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit of what you can do to counteract these things, or how we should be reacting to these, how we should respond to this stuff happening, and what we need to do about it. And so stay tuned for like the very end. Don't get too down in the dumps about what's happening, because there is good news at the end of this. And so I'm going to be discussing that from the full picture. But before I can get the chance to tell you guys what we should do about it and what the good news is here, I really want to go through each and every aspect of this so that you guys get a clearer picture of what's happening. Because if you're like me, how I was at the beginning of researching this, I didn't have a clear picture of what was going on here. I had sort of an overview, a broad look, a broad brush scope of this. So let's get some terminology again out of the way really, really quickly. I mentioned already a few different words that you might not be aware of, especially if you're not particularly like tech savvy. And again, this is all stuff that I had to research for this episode, because I was not aware of a lot of these things. And even if I had heard the term before, I wasn't really aware of what that term meant, what the terminology was referring to. So there is when it comes to censorship on social media, you have being banned, being shadow banned. You can be put in a jail, what they would call like a Facebook jail or Twitter jail, YouTube jail. That's where you are unable to access your account for a certain amount of days. And then you can be removed completely. They can actually take your entire account off. And that is true across the board. As far as I'm aware, there are not any social media sites where they can't just pull you completely off if they want to. And then there is actually just being warned. You can be warned about these things, that this might happen to you if you don't stop doing what you're doing. And so you've got shadow banning, being completely removed, being put in the jail. You're getting your little strikes, right? You're like your 3 strikes, you're out kind of thing. And so I think that's covering all of it. I think that's the way that it would go. Of course, if we're talking about when we talk about YouTube, which we will, you would be referring to demonetization, which is a thing that happens over there. So let's just start with shadow banning, because this is what I think is the most pervasive. This is the most difficult to prove. And this is the thing that is happening across the board for Christians. As far as I know, the only platform that I can see that does not have this at least happening in one way or another is Parler, which is new and actually just designed for free speech. So I do have a Parler account. If you want to follow me on Parler, you can. Over the past week, I have gotten a huge amount of new followers on Parler, which I think is because there is a mass exodus happening right now from social media sites. I was even invited to participate in that social media withdraw. But I will tell you guys at the end why I'm not a part of that, why I am staying on the different social medias as long as I can. We'll get to that at the very end of this. But shadow banning is where your posts are banned, but not flat out, not publicly. You haven't been publicly reprimanded, but nobody is seeing what you're posting. So I saw some larger accounts discussing the fact that they maybe had 20,000 views, and then all of a sudden they were shadow banned and they were only getting 20 views. There was one particular person that had millions of views, and then all of a sudden they were only getting about 1 million, which sounds like, wow, you're still getting a million. But whenever you go from tens of millions of views down to just 1 million, that's a huge difference. Now, that particular situation was revolving around politics, and so there's that sort of mixture, and I think that that's actually what's happening here. We'll talk about the algorithms in a little bit, but I think what's literally happening here is that conservative Christians are being stuck inside the same grouping as conservative, politically speaking, like Republicans, and I think that that is actually where the main majority of the shadow banning happens. Now, there are believers out there that are posting about specific but biblical truths, and they are actually just being banned or removed because of that, because they are talking about scriptural truth. That is not what I mean whenever I say like a broad brushstroke of all conservatives are just sort of being put into that grouping. Now, I think whenever we talk about shadow banning, we've seen that in such a massive scale over the last 2 months, really. And I noticed it at the beginning of October, end of September, beginning of October, where all of a sudden the view count that I was getting went way down. And so one of the reasons why we want to, as content creators, focus on these numbers is not so that we can say, oh, hey, look at all of the numbers. And that's certainly not something that I would be able to do anyway. So it's not what we're doing. The reason why we want to address our analytics is that we want to make sure that we are getting our content out there to you guys in a way where you're able to actually digest it. What is the purpose of this show? It's to give you guys gracious, reformed entertainment so that I can bring you a show that is biblically minded, that has a reformed worldview, where I can give you a alternative of something to watch besides the junk that you have on TV, besides the junk that you have on the radio, or whatever it is that you are tired of hearing, all of the sin and all of the just gross immorality. That's what this show is designed for, that we can be fun, we can learn together, we can grow together, we can enjoy ourselves and laugh and be silly and have squirrels, but still have a worldview revolved around godly biblical truths. And so what is the purpose of me putting that out there and putting all of this effort into it and working for hours and hours each week, unless you guys are actually going to be able to see it? And so the analytics help us see that you guys are actually being able to access this content. If the analytics show a massive drop, then I need to find out why all of a sudden I'm not being able to get you guys this content. Now, as far as I can tell, at the beginning of this election cycle here in America, a lot of us, and I heard this from folks before this was a big thing in the news, a lot of us actually saw a massive drop in their numbers. I can see a correlation between that and YouTube, where YouTube actually receives a tremendous amount of traffic through Facebook. But that doesn't actually explain the podcasting side of this, where all of a sudden there was a podcasting lull in my numbers, where most of those are not coming straight from Facebook. Most of my podcasting is actually just coming from subscribers. People have subscribed and they're going to get to listen. And so I couldn't figure out why there was this drastic lull in so many different people's sites. So many people's actual traffic was slowing down. And at the same time, my blog traffic was skyrocketing. And so there was no way where I could actually just like triangulate this and figure out where the error was, where it was happening and why it was happening this way. And so as far as I can tell, there was actually just an overall broad stroked lowering of the visibility of people who are on the Christian conservative right. So this is not a political program, and you guys know that I say that all the time. This is not a political program. However, I do have the same hallmarks of a conservative right winger. We're talking about Christian values, we're talking about family, and we're talking about, avoiding the gross immorality on television and things of that nature. And so just the algorithms that were designed to be picked up and sort of lowered down for this election season, which we unfortunately saw across the board to this extent where they were actually having to bring these guys into the Senate and ask them what on earth was going on, because they were not just leaked lists of conservative places and things of that nature, but also really shutting down specific things that didn't necessarily need to be shut down. And I think from that, we can just see that maybe perhaps over the past couple of months that there was a large sort of shutdown of our traffic. So what we would talk about when we say organic, this is another, I probably should have defined this term earlier, but organic views, organic reach is just you guys, if you follow me on a certain, like if you follow me on Twitter, or if you follow me on Facebook, or if you follow me on Instagram, whatever it is, a certain amount of you guys will see what I post each time. Now, Instagram, which we all used to love, used to be where you had an organic reach of whoever was following you. If you followed me, you would see what I posted in your feed. Now, Facebook bought Instagram, and this is where the algorithm comes in. I mentioned earlier, Facebook bought Instagram and began to change their algorithm. Now, an algorithm is something that is generated by a human being, but actually processed through computers. And so that is what's going to decide how many people see what you're posting. What is your organic reach? It's going to be based on the algorithm, and it's got some good stuff in it. It's sort of partly supposed to stop like spammy stuff. If you are ever online and you get tired of seeing the same ad over and over and over and over and over again, and it's because you were just talking to your husband about needing new pillows, and now you can't stop seeing pillow ads. Some of the algorithm is designed to make sure that people are not spamming you repeatedly by posting the exact same thing over and over again. And so the algorithm will flag you. You'll get flagged if you do things that are spammy. And so if you post the same post every single day for a week, you're going to be flagged each time you post the exact same thing. And then they will eventually lower your algorithm results, your organic results, where you will no longer get the same amount of exposure to the people who already follow you. Now, that makes no sense. If you're thinking about this logically, if people want to see my stuff, then they're going to come and follow me. If they don't want to see my stuff, they're going to stop following me. But the point of lowering your organic view is actually to make money. So Facebook makes money off of ads. If you are trying to reach your organic base, the people who already follow you, then you are going to have to pay for it. And so originally, when this started with Instagram, you had like 85-90% organic reach. 80% of the people who follow you, let's say you have, just to make this really, really easy, you have 1,000 people that follow you on Instagram, 800 to 900 of them were going to see your posts on their feed. Then it went down slowly each month. They decreased it by 5 to 10 points until it eventually got down to 5% of your followers were now going to see organically what you post. If you wanted to up that algorithm, you had to do things called priming the algorithm. And this is where you had to go in and go through and click like on some of other people's posts, maybe talk to other people, answer your messages before you post, look through people's stories before you post anything, respond to other people, be active on the app. That's called priming your algorithm. When you prime your algorithm, the algorithm sees that you're not just there to spam people, you're not just there to get, quickly drop a post and then leave, but that you are actually there interacting with other people. And the reason why Facebook and other social media sites want this is because they want people to stay on their sites. That's the goal. The more people that stay there, the more money they will make in advertising. So they want you to stay there. And if you are a content creator like I am, then you are, if you're there on Instagram and you're talking to people and you're responding to them, or you're interacting with their posts and then they're interacting with your posts, people are going to stay on longer because you're there talking with them and such. That's why the big push was for stories last year. All throughout this year, the big push was for videos. They want original content. They don't want you posting new things. So recently, Instagram changed it to where you couldn't just repost whatever you wanted. You had to actually link back to the other person. They made it a little bit more difficult for you to repost. So the goal of these algorithms is actually on the surface, is to stop people from spamming. So what does an algorithm have to do with shadow banning? The algorithm has everything to do with how things are shadow banned, because shadow banning generally is not a person clicking a button. It's an algorithm lowering your results so that you are no longer seeing the organic reach. Now, unfortunately, the algorithm is primed full of things that are supposed to be discouraging violent hate speech. Now, if you were listening and not watching, then you did not just see me do the quote bunnies, but I just did the quote bunnies. The idea of hate speech is one of those sort of, I don't even know how to put this to where it would be a kind and soft way to say this. You cannot just make an arbitrary statement like we're against hate speech, because what's hate speech to one person is not hate speech to another person. So hate speech is something that is literally going to have to be defined by what your authority is. What is your worldview? Who is the one deciding what hate speech is to you? Because year before last, in this very state where I am now at, right next door to the city that I'm at, the city next door to me had a pride parade where there was a float. That's what they call them, right? Like the thing. Sorry, I've been out of high school for too long. There was a float that had an image of Jesus doing something that was incredibly inappropriate. It was unbelievably blasphemous. And when we all heard about it, we were shocked because this particular city next door is very conservative, very, very Christian. I was excited when we moved here because there's like 3 Reformed churches, which is crazy. Like, usually there's barely one. So it was shocking to all of us that this happened in this city, but nobody burned anything down. Nobody was threatened. Nobody's life was threatened. It wasn't called hate speech, even though it was incredibly offensive to all of us believers. I mean, the most offensive thing that I have ever seen in my life. That's what that was. I have never heard of anything as offensive as that. That is just the epitome of wickedness. Would I call it hate speech? No. What on earth is hate speech? This is just this vast vacant term that you can put anything that you want into it. Should somebody go to jail because they did something to offend me? No, that is nonsense. Now, if that was an image of Muhammad and he was doing this inappropriate thing, would there have been death threats? Absolutely. Would this have been called hate speech? Absolutely. And that is where, on the left side of things, where you have this sort of freedom of speech where they can say and do anything that they want offensive, it sort of knocks up against itself, because you can say and do anything that you want that's offensive as long as you're not offending some of their other minority groups that they like more than you. And so it just depends on who's in favor at the time, right? So hate speech comes into play in this because a lot of these social media guys, they all have in their statements and their agreements that you have to avoid hate speech, that you have to avoid speech that could incite violence. You have to, avoid these things that might be inappropriate for children. And then they get to enact these rules and shadow ban you based on their algorithm if it looks like you're posting something that's borderline. Well, the majority of the Christian views that we hold to a lot of these leftists, they do consider it hate speech. This is something that they consider hateful. They don't look at our belief, our value, our Christian beliefs, our religion as something that we should be able to practice in freedom, because to them it's hateful. So when you have this like just generalization of this rule stating that you are, going to make sure that you ban all hate speech, your algorithm is pinpointing these things. And anytime somebody is connected with that stuff, you don't necessarily have to pull their stuff or even give them Facebook jail or Twitter jail or anything like that. You don't have to ban them outright for them to be flagged by your algorithm, and shadow banning is the result of that. I've seen it happen where just somebody who is connected to somebody else that has a popular video about things then sees a decrease in all of their content. Why is that happening? Because they've been shadow banned. Why were they shadow banned? Because they followed somebody or liked something that was considered hate speech. Now, thrown into all of the mix of this, and shadow banning sort of begins and ends here, right, is the idea of the fake news, right? This has been a weird term for the last few years that has just been thrown around by everybody. Fake news. Babylon Bee took a huge hit because they were described as a fake news outlet. And that is just nonsense, right? Like it's satire. It's just the Christian version of The Onion. It's satire. It's supposed to be a joke. And unfortunately, because it's satire on the Christian side, it was considered fake news, and they took a major hit. And I'm sure that all the people who liked and subscribed or shared and all of that stuff likewise took a hit, because the algorithm is seeing that you are liking and sharing fake news. So now you are flagged, and now you're going to be shadow banned for a certain period of time until you can prove that you can behave yourself like a big girl or boy online. So obviously I'm being a little bit facetious there, but it is actually the way that these algorithms work. And Babylon Bee is an excellent example of that. Now, that's shadow banning, and it goes straight into banning from there. If you are an unlucky number drawn, you just happen to get the hit of the algorithm that day, or somebody or some group flags you enough times, you can be banned. Now, banning is something that will happen across all of the major platforms. You can be banned from just about anything. Now, ordinarily, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest would be a little bit more loosely connected with this. TikTok has been known to do this. Instagram has actually done this to one of my beloved sisters in Christ, actually locked her out for a certain period of time for absolutely no reason that they gave her whatsoever. This is banning in prison. So you're banned for just a small amount of time. Maybe it's 3 days, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month. It just depends. But if you keep on making the same mistakes that got you banned, then you will eventually be completely kicked out, right? So there's like a 3 strikes, you're out kind of rule here. But the shadow banning is in effect to sort of discourage your behavior. Then if that doesn't fix the problem, because most of us are actually not being told that this is happening, we can't prove it, so we have no idea what it is that caused the shadow ban. Now you're going to get a strike. You're going to get a strike for whatever, if it's hate speech, if they view that they decide that you're sharing fake news, whatever their ridiculous reason is. And by the way, they don't have to give you a reason to do this. They can actually just lock you out anytime they want. Then now you're banned, and this can happen across the different groups. And you might actually have been targeted by another group. This does happen, unfortunately. There are mass groups on all the different social media sites that are really literally looking for Christian people who are promoting certain viewpoints, who believe in the sufficiency of scripture, who will point to God's word as their authority and hold to that. And these groups will flag your stuff as something that it's not. Now, a lot of times these false flags are overturned, and you'll just be fine. You'll be okay to keep going, but not every time is that the case. There are times whenever somebody is flagged for something that is not true, that's not actually what they're posting. One of the examples that I saw was nudity. There were people that were being flagged for nudity, and their post didn't even have like a human being in the picture whatsoever. So that should have obviously been overturned by the people who are reviewing these. There's real genuine people reviewing these flags. It should have been overturned, and it wasn't. And so you have to wonder in that instance, why was that not overturned? And now this person has been banned, and if they come back and it happens again, then they can actually be completely kicked out. So now you have to look at the opposite spectrum here from what is being banned. If you post something about abortion, if you post something that is against abortion, you're going to get flagged. You're going to get shadow banned or flat out banned. If you have a group of people who believe something is very offensive and are saying, hey, this is actually offending my religion, this is offensive to me, this is actually violence to me, for you to say that it's okay to pull apart a baby in the womb. This is violent rhetoric. This is something that should be construed as literally violent and inappropriate for children to see. And the algorithm is like, no, that's totally fine, that's cool, but okay, so you're a believer, you're a Christian, and you're saying that this is something that shouldn't happen, that abortion is wrong. Oh, that's hate speech, that's violent. You could be inciting violence against all those abortion folks out there that are going to work to slaughter children. I think that is where the groups here actually show their clear discrimination against Christians. That is illegal, at least here in America. It is illegal for you to discriminate against one group rather than the other. And the only way that is not the case is if you are flat out not allowing abortion to be discussed on social media. If it is violent rhetoric or hate speech or inappropriate for children for you to talk about why abortion is sinful or wrong or why it shouldn't be legalized, then it should likewise be just as inappropriate to talk about it in a positive light. What is it here that's actually offensive? Is it my opinion about this? Because if my opinion about this is offensive, that's not hate speech, it's just my opinion. If it's the act that is violent, if it's this topic that is offensive, that shouldn't be discussed, then to make sure that you're not discriminating against one group or the other, then the entire topic needs to be separated from the social media site. However, that's not what we see. Now, for me personally, I don't want to see the other side being silenced any more than I want to see our side being silenced. I want to have this discussion. I want to have all of these discussions. I do not believe that it is helpful for anybody for us to all pretend like we believe something that we don't believe. Like, I want to know out there who is actually a racist, right? So rather than making everybody so uncomfortable that they can't tell you what they actually feel, I want to know if a company is actually literally run by a racist, because if they're just going to pretend like they're not racist so that they don't get, banned, then I don't know where they stand. I want to be able to not shop there if they are genuinely a racist. And I can't do that if we're not having these conversations. If we're limiting the conversations where you can't say whether or not you agree with same-sex marriage, if you can't say how you feel about that without getting fired, then now I don't know where you stand. Likewise, the person who is maybe pro same-sex marriage, they don't know where you stand. If they want to not shop there, then they need to know where you stand, but they don't need to shut down your freedom of speech to say, hey, this is hate speech if you disagree with me. Now you're basically forcing people to pretend like they agree with you. And there are a lot of businesses out there that will do that. Actually, the mass majority of businesses suddenly jumped on a bandwagon where they were all of a sudden pro same-sex marriage where they had never been before. Why? Because the momentum was there, and what they care about is the money. They don't actually care about the issues. Businesses are businesses. They're there to actually make money. And so I don't want somebody pandering to me as a believer. I want to know, are you genuinely a believing place? Like, are you really literally run by Christians, or are you Hobby Lobby out there with like your Joyce Meyer books sitting next to your John MacArthur books? There's a problem with that, right? I want to know where you actually stand so that I can decide whether or not I want to stand with you or if I would rather not stand with you. And we can't do that if we're not having honest discussions. And we shouldn't be discriminating against groups irregardless of what the conversation is. I want to know who the Nazis are, right? Like, I want to know who the real people are who feel the way that we're being told we all feel. And I can't do that if everybody that believes that way is being banned. So is this their right as a private business to discriminate against people for their religious beliefs? No, not here in America. At least it's not. You don't have the right to allow only one group, only one religious group to have an opinion and vocalize that, and then to discriminate against other groups simply because you don't like their religion, because you don't like the fact that they're Christian. You don't have that right here in America to discriminate against me based on my beliefs. And so there is that point of separation where we leave the realm of legalities. And I feel like this is the easiest way to show that. Now, I think it's wrong regardless of whether or not you are actually discriminating against me because I'm a Christian. I don't think we should be shadow banning people because they have beliefs that you don't have. Now, if we want to get into the idea of fake news and being banned because you're sharing fake news, you guys need to remember that if you are a biblical creationist like I am, if you are a card-carrying young earth creationist, that there are actual algorithms out there that will stop you from sharing your opinion because that's fake news. If you share the fact that evolution isn't true, if you look at the dinosaurs being found and you share the news that, hey, these dinosaurs are being found with actual cells and blood tissues inside them that shouldn't be there if they're millions of years old, well, that's fake news. You can't share that. So you need to see like where this can lead to and how the algorithm is finding you if you are not actually a major outlet for content. All of these things where we would disagree. If you disagree on climate change and you're sharing the other side of the argument, that can be considered fake news. If you are a Christian that does believe that we need to be addressing Black Lives Matter in a different way. So if you're looking at just thinking and the way that they've done a tremendous job addressing the riots and Black Lives Matter and Antifa, that is a different perspective on what's happening in the news right now that can be misconstrued as fake news. And of course, I already gave the example of Babylon Bee, which is literally not a news outlet, like whatsoever. They are satire. It is a joke, and it has been flagged as fake news. So these are the ways that banning can cause major problems. Now, there are people who have been banned off of Facebook, and they are not allowed back. There are Justin Peters doesn't run his Facebook page. Somebody else runs the Justin Peters Facebook page. That's a great example of that. Now, he was not kicked off of Twitter. He decided to leave Twitter, but Facebook is a different story. So you can be kicked off of Instagram, off of Facebook, off of Twitter, and you can be banned off of YouTube as well. They can pull your whole channel. So that is banning. That does happen. It happens across the board. Usually a person is actually just put in like the Facebook prison. And if you get less than 3 strikes in a certain amount of time, after that, you get to start over. So it just depends on what's happening in that particular case. And that makes it an unfortunate issue where every single case is unique in that there's human beings deciding the fate of that person's Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. And so that's after the fact, after the algorithm says, hey, you've been naughty, here's your little check mark. A human being, if you say, hey, I disagree, a human being is going to look at this and decide whether or not you're right or wrong. And so there are a lot of issues where we see people who are being banned, but 1,500 other content creators are doing the exact same thing and they're not being banned. Why? Well, they drew the unlucky straw that day. And so it is an issue of being banned across social media for actually telling the truth about Christian values, about whether or not Christians are being persecuted throughout the world. If you're talking about terrorist attacks being targeted straight towards Christians, Christian churches being targeted, things to that nature, that is all stuff that will get you flagged for hate speech or trying to entice violence or fake news or whatever it is that their very broad rulings can state. Or they don't have to tell you anything at all. They can actually just kick you off and not tell you why they've done it. They can put you in a restricted little prison because it is a private company and they can do what they want. So at this point, it has to be decided, like I mentioned already, whether or not this is a free speech issue, if this is a discrimination issue. These things, they need to be decided by more intelligent people than me. Personally, on just a personal level, I think this is wrong no matter what, because it is stifling the ideas that we can talk with one another. And if you are on any side of any issue whatsoever and you do not want to talk to somebody disagreeing with you, how is it possible for you to actually share your belief with other people that might not understand? Once they understand what you're saying, they might actually agree with you. So you're not going to convert anybody. In other words, you're not interested in converting anybody to your side. You just don't want to have to hear anybody else's opinion. That's a strange worldview for me to understand. I can't actually wrap my mind around not wanting to hear somebody else's side of things, because I actually enjoy understanding what other people think. Even if I completely and totally disagree with it, I want to be able to understand where they came from. So those are the different terms. You can be shadow banned, you can be banned, you can be put in a little prison, you can be check marked, as I mentioned. And so this all revolves around hate speech, the rules that suggest that you sort of can't incite violence. And I already mentioned that is arbitrary. People can come to those conclusions based on completely different things. And so that is where all those terminologies lead to. So let's talk a little bit briefly about the different social media sites and how this plays out. So YouTube, of course, I'm on YouTube. A lot of these sites are connected in the way that the algorithms work with one another. But the one thing that you need to understand is that all of these sites are designed to compete against one another. So if you are on YouTube and you share a YouTube link over to Facebook, your YouTube link is less likely to be seen by the mass majority of your organic followers, because Facebook doesn't want those people to leave and go to YouTube, because you go to YouTube and then you fall down the YouTube hole of all the different videos that they're gonna advertise to you. So YouTube, you get over there and you happen to be posting videos about things that YouTube decides is not appropriate. Whatever the reason is, they view it as not appropriate. The first thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to be demonetized. What that means is if you have somehow magically managed to make your way up to a certain amount of followers and a certain amount of views, then you are able to actually get paid for those ads that they're already putting on your videos. So regardless of whether or not you are actually getting paid for it, there are usually going to be ads in videos on YouTube. But being monetized means that you will then actually be paid for those ads. And this is a good thing for content creators because it is expensive to make content. So this is one of those ways where content creators can make money without actually asking you to support them on Patreon or things to that nature. However, if you are a Christian and you are on YouTube, it is very, very likely that you will eventually have your videos, maybe not all of them, but certainly some of them, demonetized based on what you're discussing in those videos. If you talk about abortion whatsoever on YouTube, and you are against it, you are talking about how it is not good or how it is sinful or whatever it is, then that particular video is going to be flagged and demonetized. Now, if you have gotten enough hits on your YouTube channel, and this does happen quite often to conservatives that are talking about politics because they're, of course, supporting fake news. I did the scare quotes again. But if you are a content creator over there and you're talking about things that Google, because YouTube is owned by Google, that Google disagrees with, then you are more likely to be flagged for all those things. A believer is going to be flagged if they are discussing same-sex marriage. And when I say flagged, I just mean your videos are going to be demonetized, not suggesting that you're going to be necessarily kicked out or banned or anything to that nature, but your videos will instantly be demonetized. Now, why is that a problem? Well, first of all, it's a problem because the people who are supporting the opposite opinion of yours are not being demonetized. So that is discrimination against my religious views here on this channel. And the instant response is, but you still have the freedom of speech to say what you want to say. And the problem with that is that freedom of speech means that you have the equal freedom of another person to speak. You are being incentivized not to say certain things on YouTube, and you're being penalized if you do say certain things on YouTube. That is not the same for the other side that is discussing the opposite of the opposing opinion of what you have. That is not freedom of speech. And if YouTube is going to continue to consider itself a free speech platform and not a platform that is regulating freedom of speech, then they are going to have to fix this, or else they're just lying about what they actually are. Does YouTube have the freedom as a private company to censor me as a content creator? They certainly do have the absolute control to censor whoever they want to censor on their platform. Do they have the right to say that any believing Christian cannot be paid financially for the ads that they are running on those videos simply because they have differing viewpoints as a Christian, as my religious view? No, that's discrimination. You can't discriminate against somebody because of their religious views. If a Muslim is on YouTube and they are talking about why abortion is wrong or why they don't agree with same-sex marriage and they are not being penalized for that, then there is discrimination happening on YouTube. I have not been able to find massive accounts of Muslims being penalized on social media anywhere. So this is that same issue. Is it freedom of speech or is this freedom of religion? Which side of this does this end up happening on? Is this discrimination, or are we just being told because this is a private platform that they don't like what we have to say? Is this the same issue as somebody writing on a cake and not wanting to have to put on the cake what they don't want to put? Is this a private business being able to say, because of our belief systems, we disagree with you, we don't want to have to allow that? Now, the issue here, the problem here, is that that's not what YouTube is saying. They're not saying, hey, Christians, we don't actually want your opinions on here. No, they're saying that they're open for everybody. Now, the cake baker that says, hey, I'll serve you and you can eat here and I will serve anything, I just don't want to be a part of your religious ceremony because it goes against my personal religious beliefs. But if you want to order a cake, I'll bake you a cake, I'll do whatever you want. I just can't be a part of your religious ceremony because it disagrees with me. That is a problem because that cake bakery is literally being completely and totally honest with you, and nobody went to any of the Muslim cake bakeries that would likewise not have done it and said, hey, how dare you not do it? Why? Because they were only discriminating against Christian businesses. And that's the best example that we can give. If you are not concerned with other groups being just feeling the same way about this as Christians do, then you don't have a problem with our views. You don't have a problem with the cake baking. You have a problem with Christians, and that is discriminatory. Regardless of how large of a massive group of Christians there are in the world, that has nothing to do with being discriminated against. So That's where YouTube is as far as this goes. They will take down your videos if they feel like your video is inciting violence, or if they feel like you are sharing fake news. Now, that's something that's sort of recent. Within the last few years, they have actually canceled certain people's YouTube channels. That can happen if you are gotten check marked for hate speech too many times in a certain amount of time. Now, of course, they can also get you for copyright infringement, which is great. I think that's very helpful. There are unfortunately times where copyright infringement is claimed whenever there wasn't actually any copyright infringement, and then you have to fight that and then get it reversed and things of that nature. So that can be sort of difficult, but I understand the need of that. Now, Facebook is, of course, owned by Google. Google has been completely and totally outed for having a entire list of conservative, this is political speaking politically conservative groups that they are burying their websites to. That is completely different than what we're talking about here. So again, I think that here in this situation, it's quite possible that we're just being lumped in as believers. We're being lumped into the Google group that they're saying for conservatives. Now, does that make it any better? No, of course not. No, it really certainly does not, especially not whenever there's such a huge monopoly on the market of search engines that Google has taken. And in case you were wondering, these massive companies do actually buy out their competitors. That's not just like a joke. There are people out there actually making sites and making apps to be bought by these bigger companies, because these bigger companies, as soon as they see that they have a little bit of competition, will buy them. That's what happened with Facebook and Instagram. That's why Instagram now, all of a sudden, you went from getting a huge organic view from all of your followers to like 5 to 10%. Now, for YouTube, there is an algorithm, but it is not the same as Facebook, Twitter, or Pinterest. So the algorithm there is going to be completely different than what we would be looking at. So any of the stuff that I mentioned earlier about how to prime an algorithm, that's not how it works on YouTube. So let's move on actually to Facebook. And when we talk about Facebook, I'm going to lump Instagram in to Facebook. It's sort of it's almost hard to imagine, because I think we all loved Instagram for so long because of the fact that it was not Facebook. It was not Twitter. It was the best of social media, because for so long it was, people posting great quotes and just discussing theological truths, and then really cool videos of how to do your makeup or hair, and slime videos and things of that nature. But Facebook did buy Instagram a few years ago. I think it's been 2 or 3 years. And they changed the algorithm to follow very closely in line with Facebook. So if you are running ads on Facebook, they should theoretically run on Instagram. So if your ads are being denied on Facebook, they are being denied on Instagram, which means that Facebook now has these two platforms. Now, I mentioned earlier that I do actually have a sister in Christ that was blocked on Instagram. She was put in like a little Instagram prison where she wasn't allowed into her actual page, and then it stopped, and nobody explained why it happened. There was no actual here's your email, this is what you did wrong, don't do it again. It's just sort of bam, you're blocked, and you don't know why, and you can't contest it. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes they do tell you why, and you can contest it, but very rarely are those when you go to contest it, very rarely is that actually overturned. So that is Facebook and Instagram combined. Now, I have talked to several people where their organic views, and this of course includes David Knight from Exposit the Word, and I will make sure to link to his stuff down below so that you guys can actually show him some love and some support. Since he is having this, he showed me a screenshot of his Facebook engagement where he is having, where instead of 47,000 followers being able to view his actual videos being posted on Facebook, it's only like a couple hundred. How is only a couple of hundred of people only even seeing what he's posting if 47,000 people follow him? Well, because there's such a thing as shadow banning, and the shadow banning thing happens where, well, as we discussed already, where your organic reach is lower down. That organic reach is less than 5%. That's way lower than 5%. So we see this happening with these larger groups of people, and it's more evident. And he has no idea what it is that he's posted that is even causing this to be shadow banned, and several of his ads have been banned as well. So not banned, but rejected. So this is happening to Christians more so over the last couple of months, where we were, of course, during this election season, things were shut down to a drastic extent. And one of the things that happened on Instagram, just to give a idea of how drastic these social medias actually influenced the election this year, and how it being an election year changed their algorithm. Instagram stopped using hashtags. They stopped allowing hashtags. So you can type in your hashtag, but it's not going to go anywhere. You're not going to be linked to other people using that hashtag. Hashtags were stopped because they didn't want it to spread fake news. And rather than just stopping certain things like they usually do, so in case you didn't know, if you were on Instagram and you wanted to say Happy Thanksgiving, you said hashtag Happy Thanksgiving. That's going nowhere. No one's going to see that hashtag, because during the holidays, they shut hashtags down for those holidays. So Happy New Year, it's going to be shut down. So those are random, weird little things that Instagram does. But this, for the season, for the election season, they actually shut down hashtags altogether. So if you are over on Instagram and you have something that you usually put in there, a hashtag I usually use is Reformed Theology. There are a lot of people that follow me that follow the hashtag Reformed Theology, because over on Instagram, you can follow certain hashtags. So anybody that's using that hashtag will show up on your feed. That's been shut down for right now, with absolutely no notice about when it's going to be picked back up. People weren't notified in advance that it was going to happen. And so if you are a person that is on Instagram or Facebook and you're simply trying to make a living right now, where your business is shut down in physical form, and your business right now only exists in internet form, the shutting down of hashtags is going to cause a lot of problems for you, where you want to be able to get people to come to where you're selling things. It's going to cause issues. So that is one of the ways that our social media sites have actually been influencing what's happening in our world, based on their algorithms and their rules. And they can change their rules anytime they want. Instagram is a privately owned company. It's owned by the same people that own Facebook. So it's a privately owned company. They can decide to use hashtags. They can decide not to use hashtags. That's their choice. If they were choosing to discriminate against a certain group of people based on those hashtags, that would be different. But they're not. They're simply using these hashtags to stop the promotion of certain things on their social media platforms, which is just yucky. It's yucky that that's happening right now. So we saw this quite a bit in Ireland whenever they were having their elections to decide whether or not they were going to allow abortion to be legalized. There was absolutely no ads allowed in that country that were targeting people who disagreed with abortion. So there was a blanketed shutdown of people who wanted to advertise over there to stop this. And I remember that happening and thinking, that's so strange. But at the time, I wasn't creating ads on Facebook, so I didn't understand how that works. But when you go to create an ad on Facebook, you tell it which countries you want it to target, which groups you want it to target. So if you are selling socks, and you're selling socks of different soccer teams, or for my friends all over the globe besides America, your football teams. That one's in there for just you guys. Football. Soccer is not the same as football in America. In case you guys were wondering, football is the Cowboys, and they're on their fourth quarterback today. It's very, very difficult. Okay, there's a reason why. If you guys are watching this and you don't realize, the Cowboys have literally gone through their first, second, and third string quarterbacks. They are now on their fourth string. It's difficult to watch. It's really, really tough. So anyways, there's always next season, right? It's okay. I'm okay. I'm not crying. You're crying. Anyways, boy, that was a major scroll. So if I wanted to sell socks, that's how I got there. Sorry about that. The socks, the squirrel. Wow, so many squirrels. If I wanted to sell socks to the world, and I wanted to specifically target a certain group of people in a certain country with a pair of socks that happen to have their favorite football teams on those socks, then I would click that country, because nobody in a different country is necessarily going to be interested in those socks. And so that's how ads work. And for the point and period of time where there were elections happening there in Ireland, where they were deciding on whether or not to legalize abortion, you could not advertise there if you had a differing opinion about pro-abortion against abolition. So if you were an abolitionist like I am, where you are against abortion, then you were not able to actually advertise in Ireland whatsoever. All of your ads were blocked. But if you were pro-abortion, your ads were not blocked. So that is a big problem. And that's what we mean when we say that ads can be affected in that way. So let's move on to a couple of the lesser known ones. We're going to deal with Twitter last because Twitter, wow, just wow. But some of the lesser known ones that you would not expect to actually have these issues that I was shocked by, because whenever I first got started with this, I was very skeptical. I was thinking, okay, there's no way this is a main wide stream kind of thing where it's happening to a lot of people. And then whenever I began researching it, I realized that I was very, very wrong. So we're going to talk about Pinterest, Reddit, TikTok, and Amazon and apps. So Amazon, we're just going to throw in there a little bit, but the App Store also we're going to throw in there a little bit as well. TikTok, Reddit, and Pinterest have all been caught, and Twitch as well. Twitch is another one. Pretty much as far as I could see, except for Parler, there was not one single social media site that did not at least have accusations standing of having blocked or censored Christians. So, but there were actual people on Reddit that were talking about certain things that had them taken down. That is less known over in Reddit. That is not something that is like a major issue there. For the most part on Reddit, if you want to talk about something controversial, it's actually a great place to be able to talk about things controversial. So that is not a widespread phenomenon over there, but there were accusations of this happening. And of course, shadow banning is going to happen in Reddit if you are posting things that are not within their standing. Shadow banning it's going to happen across the board, right? So that would be a thing that happens over there as well. Pinterest was surprising to me. I mentioned at the beginning of this that Pinterest was the only social media site that I kept whenever I first got saved. And I kept it because I love Pinterest. You can get ideas for meals and decorations and quotes and all sorts of stuff. And I did also mention that don't be deceived by Pinterest's squeaky clean surface. If you let your kiddos on there and you don't monitor it, it's just as dangerous as anything else. You can eventually, if you look long enough, you will eventually run into very inappropriate things. So that is just a like little point that I wanted to mention, that it's not as safe as maybe it looks. But Pinterest has actually been sued for taking things down. So they are not just active in shadow banning and banning or removing, they bury things that they don't want people to see, stuff of that nature, but they have actually taken things down. And it usually, like it does with so many of the other sites, revolves around people who are against abortion. Their viewpoints are not something that Pinterest wants to have on their site, and those kind of things have been taken down altogether. So Pinterest has also likewise been the cause. Now, Pinterest is another one of those places where you can prime the algorithm. You can hashtag things to that nature. It's just not as intensive as it would be on Facebook and Instagram, because those are places where your algorithm is literally going to make or break you, whether or not people can see anything or not. Pinterest is a little bit different than that. So there are still things like that happening over on Pinterest, but it's not as wide scale as Facebook and Twitter. And I think that's mostly because this is not a platform generally used for that type of thing. TikTok, on the other hand, as we all know, owned by China, is frequently being accused of taking down Christian content. Although it's run by China, you see a lot of stuff on there that I would assume the Chinese government would disagree with. But it is still running based on an algorithm. You can still be shadow banned. There are people on there that were blowing up with their like Christianese stuff, not necessarily people that I would agree with theologically, but they were having some success over there on TikTok with their Christian stuff, where they were praying or things like that were suddenly shadow banned, and their videos went from getting hundreds of thousands of views to just getting a couple of hundred. That shadow banning thing is way more obvious when it happens to somebody with a really, really big following. But just to mention, before we move on to the next social media platform, TikTok is the home of one of my very favorite TikTokers, which would be Kristen, and her actual follow, her tagline, which I will include a link to down in the descriptions below, is at XTIN .rose, ROSE. And so that is one of my favorite TikTokers and a listener of this show. So hi Kristen. I'm so thankful that she is over there on TikTok, because she is using her platform as a chance to share the gospel, and she goes live or posts things, and she's able to talk to people. And she did mention to me once that TikTok, their people over there do seem to be a little bit more open to discussing these things, and so that is a good thing about TikTok. But there are people who have been shadow banned or just flat out banned, put in like a little TikTok prison, things to that nature. So the same stuff that's happening on the other sites is happening on TikTok as well. The Apple Store is a weird one. So basically what you have here is Apple deciding that if you have an app that is in agreement with something that they disagree with, that they can just stop offering your app. And that has happened to a few notable people. Not necessarily all of the people are Christians. They are all conservative. So politically speaking, they can ban your stuff. And then, of course, if you are following, or if you have something that they disagree with, they can ban your app. And that's unfortunate, because it's an app store. Like, why would you not allow all of the opinions in app form? It's very confusing to me. Amazon has pulled books, and they are pulling these books because they are in disagreement with the social norm today of certain opinions, and because they are hate speech. So if they believe, Amazon, if they believe that it is hate speech, they can pull your book, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that is disturbing. That has happened to a lot of Christian publishers. Books that are quite a bit old, like decades old, have been pulled as well. So, and there, of course, recently have been shows that have been either not allowed on Amazon for streaming, or have been pulled from streaming from Amazon. And so that is an issue there from both the Christian worldview and also from the political conservative worldview. The disturbing part of that is that Amazon has a massive amount of shows and books for the opposite opinion, for the opposing opinion. But we are seeing essentially the modern day version of book burning, when we see people saying that if you have an opposing opinion to ours, you can't even sell your books in public. That's very disturbing to me. Throughout this whole episode, I've been pointing to the fact that we really are shutting down the opposite opinions of people simply because we disagree with them. And that's very disturbing to me for any sort of conversation, regardless of how vile or inappropriate it is, or how disturbing it is, or how much I disagree with it. You should still have the right to discuss it. And do you have that right as a privately owned store to sell what you want to sell? That's difficult for Amazon, because Amazon is not necessarily just one store. They have a lot of other stores, thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of other stores selling on them. So that is something that, like, the legal experts can handle, because that's to me personally, it's disturbing, right? Like, avoiding the legal side of that, it's disturbing to me that anybody would want to burn books, in the modern version of burning books, that anybody would want to shut down somebody else's opinion just so they don't have to hear it, is very disturbing to me. I don't understand that perspective. If you have such a great argument against my own personal viewpoints, then make that fantastic argument. If you don't have an argument about it whatsoever, then research these things so that you do have an argument, and then we can have this discussion. But just shutting people down is very, very weird to me. Last thing, last little social media platform that I wanted to discuss was Twitter. Whereas there is a semblance, a sort of pretense on the other websites, on the other social media sites, of wanting to support freedom of speech, Twitter is just more like, no, we're gonna let what we want let, and what we don't want, we're not gonna have on there. And that is primarily because of an echo chamber within the left-leaning atheistic side of things, where they don't hear from people on the opposite side. You don't have these fact checkers that Facebook and Twitter are using. They are all left-leaning. Places like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is going to be lumping groups of just everyday Christians with actual radical groups that are harmful. And so they're very aggressive against Christianity and against right conservative leaning opinions. And that is the group that a lot of these social media platforms are deciding to use, to lean with, to work with to decide whether or not something is hate speech or not. And so you have places like Twitter where just a couple of years ago, of the 25 people that are involved in this panel to decide what the policies are going to be here, only one of them would have considered themselves a conservative. And that's been a couple of years ago. So I mean, I don't know, is that one little lone conservative there still? Are they even really conservative? We don't really know. But of 25 people that are deciding these guidelines, that are deciding these policies, only one of them has an opposing viewpoint and the rest of them do not have an opposing viewpoint. That's an echo chamber. So they are not hearing from the other half of America, or whatever percentage of the globe would be considered conservative Christians. So they are creating policies where what we would not consider as hate speech, we would not consider as fake news, is being suggested as fake news. Is being suggested that it's hate speech simply because it disagrees with them. So Twitter is the worst of all of the different sites, and it's very difficult to be worse than Google. But Twitter has managed it. And they definitely are, as far as social media platforms go, they are the ones that have the strongest leaning towards censorship, the strongest leaning towards banning of all of the other social media sites. The shadow banning thing that happens on Twitter is huge, absolutely insane, where you can have thousands upon thousands or tens of thousands of followers, and just the tiniest portion of your followers are actually going to be seeing what you're posting in their feed. That's not suggesting the people that are liking it. I mean, the people that will even see it in their feed. Most of the stuff that is posted by conservative Christians is not even going to be seen. And I can attest to this personally, that of the people that I follow, I can click the little button that says I want to be notified every time these people post something, and I'll see what they're posting for about a week, and then I won't see it again. I will have to go to their personal sites. And that's very difficult and frustrating, because there are a huge amount of people that I would like to support and be, seeing their stuff and being caught up on what their ministries are doing, but I'm not going to see it in my feed. And that's because of the shadow banning situation that's happening over on Twitter, worse than all the other platforms for sure. So now that we have addressed the actual issue and we see what's happening throughout social media and all the different platforms, and I didn't mention this, but it's another thing that is in consideration. You can also be taken off of like Patreon if you are being supported on Patreon and they consider your content hateful or hate speech. They can actually close down your account there too. So there's very few places on social media platforms that can actually be said to be totally free. And I mentioned Parler, of course, several times. I'm not suggesting that you get off the other social media sites. As I mentioned, I'm not going to get off of social media sites. And that's where the good news comes in. What I want to actually finish this off with a little bit of happiness here to go along with all of the negativity and all the sad things that I just mentioned. First of all, as believers, we know that this is going to happen. This is not a surprise to us, for us to be as Christians, to be shadow banned or censored or any of these things is absolutely nothing compared to what our predecessors have gone through. The early church fathers literally had Romans burning their actual manuscripts, and they had to write those manuscripts by hand, you guys. Think about that. That's a lot of work. And then the Romans would come in and take them and burn them, and then also perhaps burn you at the stake or feed you to the wild animals in the Colosseum if they wanted to, simply because you were a Christian. So what we're facing here in social media platforms is frustrating. It's discouraging, but it's nothing compared to what our predecessors have actually faced. So the good news is that we do still have these platforms. I know a lot of people are leaving these platforms. I'm not against that. If you feel convicted that these platforms are so anti-Christianity that you want to go to platforms that are not going to do that, I'm assuming that's why so many people have started following me on Parler. I think that's great if that's your choice. The reason I am not choosing to do that is I almost weekly, if not daily, receive messages from people that are seeing my content and want to either thank me or ask me questions or tell me about their recent conversion, their testimonies, or how they were encouraged or how they've left Word of Faith, and they're so thankful for the groups and the information that they're getting on these different social media sites. If it's not Facebook, it's Instagram or Twitter, and that is across the board happening And it happens to a lot of us. A lot of us are hearing this. And so if my efforts go to, rather than thousands, they just go to tens of people, and those tens of people are blessed by whatever my efforts are, then that's well worth the effort. If one person sees my content, I mentioned it so many times, and I hope that this can show you guys how very genuine I am when I say this, that I didn't expect anybody to ever listen to this show. So for there to be anybody listening to this is just really tremendously fascinating to me, that you guys spend your time with me, listening to me squirrel and things to that nature. But if one person is helped by that, then that's worth it. That's why we're doing this. We are not doing this for the likes or for the following or for the attention. The Christian uh, content creators that I frequently recommend to you guys, I know them. They are beloved brothers and sisters in Christ, and they are not doing this so that they can be lifted up, but they are doing this to glorify God. And for those of us that are doing this for the glory of God, we're going to continue doing it until they kick us off, because the good news is that we can still share the gospel on these platforms. We're not being put in jail for it right now, and that's not the same in other countries. There are countries where you cannot actually even view my content, like I mentioned, China and North Korea. Um, we do have this opportunity still, and while we do have it, while we are still given this opportunity, we need to share the gospel with as many people as we can, as far reaching as we can, on whatever platform you best work with, whatever platform you best understand. If you're listening to this and you don't like any of those platforms, then thankfully we have gospel tracts, and you can hand them out to people wherever you want to go. You can hand them out. You don't have to be on social media to share the gospel with people. But while we do have social media, we can share the gospel. And that is the good news, that while we have far less reaching, far less access to the people that we would like to get to reach, while the people who follow us are frequently not seeing any of the stuff that we are creating, we know that God is sovereign, and he will sovereignly get whatever he needs to get to the people that he would like to see those things. And so it's worth it. And the next good news thing that I want to mention to you guys is that you can do a lot to help encourage people like David and all the other content creators that I reached out to. You can share their stuff. Now, it might mean that you share it and like nobody likes it and nobody sees it. And when I say like, I mean you don't get any of the little hearts, and maybe nobody sees it, but it's still going to boost that person's post that you shared it. That's just how the algorithm works. And so you can do those things. You can be encouraging in that way. If you are still staying on social media sites, you will have to go to their sites to see their stuff. I promise you that there are things in my personal feed, in the Tulips and Honey feed, that you're not going to see. It's worse for pages than it is for private accounts. So if you wanted to follow my my Tulips and Honey page on Facebook, you're not going to see the majority of the stuff that gets posted there. It's unfortunate, but it's true that only 5% to 15% of the people who follow that page are going to actually see anything in their feed unless I boost it. And even with the boosts over the last couple of months, the boosted ads that I've been posting that got through have gotten a like fraction of analytical viewings that the posts a couple of months ago were getting. And then of course several of them have actually just been flat out denied without telling me why. And I'm not the only one having that issue. There's a lot of us content creators that are having that struggle. So you can be an encouragement like that by sharing the things that your beloved content creators, whoever they are posting, the ministries that you may follow, whether it's Grace to You or Wretched Radio or whoever it is, Steve Lawson's stuff, if you're following him, Vodi Bakum, whoever it is that you have been blessed by. You may have to go to their actual feeds and then share from there. You may actually have to search for these guys. It might not come up on your feed like it used to. But the good news is that you can still go and find them because they are still on there, and you can be encouraging by messaging, by commenting under things, by clicking the like button, by clicking the share button. We still have that ability to do that. And so unfortunately, it does mean a lot more work for all of us, but we still have that opportunity to share the gospel through platforms, through social media. And even though we find this to be very distasteful, to be very frustrating and difficult, we are still able to use these platforms for free and actually reach people, albeit a smaller amount. We are still reaching people, and as long as people are seeing it, I'm going to be encouraged that this is worthwhile, regardless of the fact that I'm spending hours per week creating these little videos for you guys. And it might be that Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or whatever it is decides to shadow ban me. That will happen. And yes, it is discouraging for content creators to work really hard and have very few people see it. But if you're seeing this and this has been encouraging to you, or it's been eye-opening to you, this is maybe something that you weren't aware of that now you are aware of. Now you can go through and you can find those ministries that you used to see on your feed, but now you don't see, and you can go and be an encouragement to those guys. Then this is worth it, right? That's what this is about, to be edifying and encouraging to you as believers and to share the gospel with those that are lost, and that all of that is for the glory of God. Sola Deo Gloria. That's the point of this whole show and of everything I do. So hopefully that'll be a point of encouragement for all of you guys, that we will keep plugging away as long as there are internet bars on the screen, and as long as we can keep doing this, we're going to keep doing this. And I would really greatly appreciate you joining with me to pray for all of the content creators creating good, solid, biblically sound, theologically solid content right now, that we are all we're all dealing with these weird algorithm issues. The algorithm, by the way, changes like a lot. So once you figure it out, they'll just change it. So if you guys could join me in praying for all of these wonderful content creators. And also I just want to thank each and every one of you guys. You share my content, you like it, you've subscribed, you've been just tremendous. I get so many messages from you guys, so many emails, and I'm just blown away by your support. It is incredibly, incredibly encouraging. So whenever I deal with things like this, I'm not so discouraged, because my listeners, you guys right there, y'all are awesome. That's why. And I love you, Humblebees, and I will see you on Friday. Bye, guys.
Thanks for listening, Humblebees. This is Tulips and Honey. Over and out.
I think that diamond still needs a little more polish.
Yeah.
Let's get ready to rumble. Ha ha. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's better. Across different medium, different like really conservative. Now, a loose screw somewhere. There we go. We're just gonna not touch it. And then I touched it. Sorry. Okay. Last year, just last year, in this, was it last year or the year before that? I better think this through here. Let's see here. Reddit. There were actual Reddit streams, not streams. I'm on Reddit. I should know what this is called.